24-hour arcade. It was already dark by the time the weather rolled into the night sky in that dusty southwest city. Rain lashed the windshield in sheets as thunder rolled low across the sky. I'd been stationed there only a week, young, restless, and bored out of my mind. Around 2 in the morning, with the bars long closed and nothing else open, Reddit led me to the only thing still running, a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week adult store. Not really my style, but the subreddit hinted at a crazy experience, so I decided to go. I drove 25 minutes through the now falling rain into the industrial section of the city and pulled into a gravel lot. The building hunched on a dead-end street, its neon signs flickering weakly against the storm and providing the only light in the area like its own little world. Right beside it sat 2 abandoned houses, windows boarded up but long since broken into. I killed the engine and stepped out into the rain. A flash of lightning cracked overhead, turning the whole street bone white for a single heartbeat. In that instant, I saw a pale face pressed against the boarded windows of the nearest trap house, eyes locked directly on me. For a moment, I thought I saw pleading in those eyes, but you could never tell with a junkie. Then the darkness slammed back down, and I told myself it was just some strung-out local. Just a storm playing tricks. This was only an adult store. The neon lights suddenly seemed very inviting. Inside, the store felt almost welcoming after the chaos outside. Bright fluorescent lights hummed steadily overhead. The air was stale but familiar. I walked past an unused turnstile and chatted with the very gruff proprietor. He seemed normal but not much for chatting, so I left him to his phone and started to wander the aisles, laughing to myself. Some of it was pretty basic, but some of it was pretty out there. I started to notice that everything on the shelves was coated in a thick, undisturbed blanket of dust, like the whole place had been frozen in the late 1990s. Price tags were ridiculous, $60 for cheap plastic junk you could have grabbed anywhere else for $15. The guy behind the counter barely glanced up from his phone. It all felt weird, sure, but harmless. Just a strange little adventure to kill time. I think it was the late hour and the rumbling of thunder that made it seem surreal. I was considering leaving and wondered why I ever thought this would be cool, when I spotted the glowing neon sign beside the door covered in blackout curtains. Peep show, $1. Half joking, I asked the owner, "You really got a peep show back there?" He didn't smile. "Arcade booths. Sign is from when the place opened and the owners kept it for atmosphere, I guess. The arcades are $10 for 40 minutes of viewing, but for 30 you get unlimited time in the theater and the 40 minutes in the arcade." "Theater?" I said. "Yeah, it's set up real nice, like a real old theater feel, like the old adult movie places back in the day," he said. I had no idea what the hell he was talking about, but I pretended like I did. Figured this is what I came for, I guess, and slapped down a 20 and 2 5s. He gave me a small ticket stapled to a receipt with a code on it. The purple ticket had a smiley face. It was upside down. Thunder rumbled outside, muffled but constant now. For a second, the light flickered and threatened to go out before they came back up, all but the one over the door. That one continued to flicker and pulse and cast a sickly pall over the gray-skinned proprietor behind the counter. This was made all the more stark as I turned away to the hallway leading to the theater rooms. I stood looking down the dark hallway lit only by Christmas lights hung haphazardly along the ceiling that blinked on and off. A new color appeared every time the lights came back on, but instead of feeling festive or inviting, they made the hallway seem eerie and strange. I walked past the first door on the right that read Gay Theater and continued towards the only steady light, the glowing red exit sign at the end of the hall. I could just make out a door in the darkness as it flickered blue, then pink, then green, as I walked over the filthy commercial carpet. Halfway down the hall was a door guarded on each side by 2 ancient-looking metal detectors, or some kind of 90s anti-theft device. I vaguely wondered why someone would put this outside of a bathroom, but I quickly forgot about it when I stepped in through the door. I flipped on the light, my mood shifted completely, and it struck me how run down of a place this really was. The room was tiny and absolutely filthy. Paint peeled from the walls in long strips. A handwritten sign hung crookedly warning about throwing paper towels in the toilet. The floor was yellowed linoleum that was rolling back in the corners. The squat toilet sat with brownish water still in the bowl, and the floor around it was stained and grimy. Graffiti and phone numbers covered every surface, along with cryptic phrases I didn't understand, like submissive CD, 775-555-4206. A vintage Debbie Does Dallas poster starring Bambi Woods was somehow permanently affixed to the door. I actually would have stolen the thing immediately if it wasn't welded in place. A much less desirable Taxi Driver, an XXX parody starring Tommy Pistol, hung over the commode, barely attached at all, but I left that one for others to appreciate. The whole place smelled like decades of neglect and stale piss. I got out as fast as humanly possible, still trying to laugh it off. I stepped back into the dark hallway, and now I was deep enough into the semi-interrupted gloom to really feel just how bizarre the whole scene was. The distant drum thunder, the empty store, the ghostly blue glow that fell over me every third change of the lights. I stepped past the second door marked Gay Theater and finally arrived at the last door on the left marked The Man Cave. It seemed strange that the straight theater would be called The Man Cave, but just as I reached out to push the door open, I glanced to my right at the emergency exit. In the light pulses, I could just make out that it was padlocked shut. I don't know why this bothered me so much, but it did. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, immediately relieved that it was empty. The theater was a converted bedroom from the original house that made up the store. It was small and the air inside felt heavy, owing mainly to the electric space heater on the floor, set to 72, despite being early summer. The walls were clad in cheap synthetic wood paneling, the kind that was popular in low-end trailers, now warped and yellowed around the seams. I could barely make out any details by the blue light of the movie playing on the cheap Walmart TV that hung crookedly on the wall, but I could just see 3 low futon-style couches arranged in a U-shape. The movie was skipping like the DVD was damaged, and it further reinforced how cheap the whole thing felt. Being the only one there and not sure about touching anything, I decided to flip on the lights for a better look at the place. The 3 mismatched leather couches were shoved against the walls like afterthoughts, arranged so that anyone sitting on them would be forced to stare directly at each other. One was a deep black pleather, cracked and split along the cushions, its foam innards weeping through the tears. The other 2 were brownish-orange vinyl futons that were super low to the ground. The surfaces of both sofas possessed a greasy, high-gloss sheen that had nothing to do with cleanliness. It was a dark patina of sweat and whatever else had rubbed off the clientele over the years. The floor was a patchwork of filth. Half the room was covered in low-pile office carpet that was originally gray, but was now a map of dark, unidentifiable stains. It was matted down in the high-traffic areas and sticky enough that every step made a faint, wet sucking sound against the soles of my shoes. Where the carpet ended, raw, white-painted wooden floorboards began. Paint was peeling and scuffed away, revealing graying wood beneath. The grime here was worse. Thick stains of black dust and dried fluids ringed the ancient floorboards. And then there was the center of the floor. Right in the middle of the carpet, what looked like dried old rust lay across it, looking uncomfortably like a drag mark. Next to the black futon, caught in the harsh glare of the overhead light, sat a single discarded wrapper and some kind of dirty balloon. The foil wrapper was torn and flattened against the sticky gray floorboards like a monument to the room's true purpose. It was a visual promise that whatever happened in this room, it wasn't a theater like the man described or that I had expected. There were no rows of seats or a projector, just dirty couches used by people who came to a dark room like this on nights like tonight. I was disgusted and wanted out before somebody else showed up. Turned off the light and I walked out the door. Back in the hallway, noises drifted from the Gay Theater across the hall. A lot of noises. I told myself it was just the movie, that there was nobody else here. As I stepped back into the main store, the proprietor looked at me. "The movie's skipping," I told him. He didn't even blink but mumbled something about changing the DVD and gave me an appraising look. He was honestly starting to creep me out a bit, and he seemed like he thought I was acting strange. Maybe I was. I had no idea what was normal in a place like this. Apparently used balloons on the floor of the man cave wasn't strange, so it was tough to judge. I ignored him as I crossed the room and noticed the steady beating of rain on the roof as I pushed through the blackout curtains into the arcade section. The shift was immediate and total. This building seemed like once upon a time it may have been a garage or storage. The floor was concrete and the walls were masonry. Pitch black swallowed me the instant the curtains fell shut, and the note of the rain changed like the roof here was made of tin. The only light came from flickering blue monitors in the arcade booths that were made out of plywood and formica. The booths had no doors, and the flickering glow of the screens inside gave the only light. Well, besides a few half-dead marquee signs on the outside of the booths. The air felt thicker and heavy. Thunder cracked outside, and somewhere deeper in the building I could hear water dripping steadily, like slow leaks in the ceiling. My footsteps echoed strangely on the floor as I started walking, and they stood out against the low sound of a half-dozen adult movies playing. The ceiling was high and wasn't connected to the arcade booths. The booths made up a kind of meandering hallway, but above me felt like a dark void that ended at a tin roof being pelted with rain. The air felt pregnant, and I suddenly realized that I wasn't alone as I saw the silhouette of a man in the first arcade to my right. It felt like I was intruding on something private, so I looked away and headed to my left in search of an open arcade down the dark and claustrophobic hallway made up of booths on each side. The place was a maze. Narrow hallways twisted left and right with no clear logic. I moved slowly, my eyes straining to adjust to the dark. Every few steps I caught movement at the edge of the blue glow. A silhouette darting back into shadow just as I rounded a corner. A man standing completely still between two booths, hands near his waist. Another figure lingering motionless in a recessed corner, barely visible. No one spoke. They just waited, stared, or stepped back into a booth as I saw them materialize in the gloom. The deeper I went, the more the layout seemed to fold in on itself in the dark, and I started to feel isolated despite realizing that the place was far from empty. I began to lose track of how far I'd come from the entrance, but it felt a long way off. As I reached the end of the hallway, my only option was to turn right or choose one of these booths. I looked down the right passage, and at the end against the outside cinder block wall, I could just barely make out a large man standing in the faint blue light of an arcade. Only his eyes shone in the electric glow, but it looked like he was struggling with the zipper of his pants as he looked into the booth from the hallway. I decided this was far enough for me and ducked into the nearest booth. I tapped the glowing touch screen on the wall, and the monitor came to life behind dirty plexiglass and particle board. The touch screen showed the names of dozens of categories of movies and even offered live experiences with real girls on camera. I tried picking a category to check it out, but the screen demanded a purchase ID, and it was then that I remembered my receipt with its upside-down smiley face and 6-digit code. I fished it out of my pocket, but when I put the code in, nothing happened. I tried several times, but it stubbornly refused to accept it. I really didn't want to go back into the hallway, but this booth was obviously broken. After a few seconds, the screen popped back off, and I was left in utter darkness except for the panel on the wall reading Enter Code. I stepped out just as a thunderclap rocked the building, and it honestly shook me to my core. Just a pure, visceral reaction of a kid afraid of the sheer power of the storm. As the thunder died, I felt my blood pounding in my ears, and the whole scene was made more intense by the soundtrack of my heartbeat thudding as I started to walk down the now empty final passage that led to the back wall and the last row of arcades. As I walked towards the wall, I tried to talk myself down. I was being ridiculous. It was only an adult store, like 1,000 other ones. It was only the storm outside that was making me feel so anxious. Maybe the lateness of the hour, or maybe the fact that the place wasn't really empty. And I told myself to calm down and just try to shake it off. The end of the hallway was a T that ran along the exterior wall, and I could feel the rolling storm against the outside as a dull rumble. I went left, but quickly realized that both booths were taken, and both men were inside also struggling with their zippers. I couldn't really tell and didn't want to make sure. I turned around to head the opposite direction and came face to face with the big guy from before. He was 6'2" at least and must have been 300 pounds with a long beard and hair. In the dark, he looked like a giant. I wanted to step past him and said, "Excuse me, bro," as I realized that he too again seemed to be struggling with the zipper on his pants. He paid me no mind as I walked by, but it was now that I realized that he wasn't watching the screen in the booth. He was watching the man watching the screen in the booth. This man also seemed to be struggling with a zipper, but I couldn't really tell, and I moved on down the dead-end hall. I finally reached an empty booth at the farthest back corner and stepped inside. The monitor flared to life, destroying whatever night vision I had left. Outside the open doorway was pure, impenetrable darkness. I punched in my code and tried to flip through the movie options, but the touchscreen felt slick and greasy under my fingers. My hands already felt dirty just from being here, and I decided to check out the booth. It's when I turned on my phone's flashlight. It was absolutely something out of a horror movie, and I was struck with how much of a mistake I had made in coming here. The walls were coated in a thick, brownish crust of filth that had built up over the years. The floor was even worse, sticky, stained, with visible footprints and grime ground into every inch. Right at my feet lay 2 pairs of discarded underwear, just left there like trash. It took me a full minute to understand what I was even looking at. Now the booth felt like a place that something bad had happened. The seat was a wooden plank with a vinyl cushion stapled to it, split down the middle, and the stuffing was hanging out. An exhaust fan kicked on above me, and it made me deaf to what was happening outside my booth as well as blind. But after turning off the light, I heard shuffling footsteps approaching in the hallway outside. Someone stopped right at the open doorway, and I froze. I couldn't see them in the blackness, but I could hear the unmistakable sound of someone fumbling with their zipper. "Booth's occupied," I called out, voice tighter than I wanted. They said nothing, but I heard them shuffle away. I was pretty much ready to leave, but wanted to at least check out what the booth had to offer. How would someone come here? I cycled through the list of genres and got a few laughs, as it all felt so cheap and of such poor quality that it made everything seem a little more normal, and I relaxed slightly. I was just checking out the live cam section when again I heard feet shuffling outside in the inky blackness of the doorway. It felt like I was in the last lighted place in the world and everything outside was just a void. As I strained my eyes and ears, looking into the nothing outside, suddenly a mid-sized older guy actually stepped into the booth with me. In the sickly blue glow, his face looked twisted and wrong, almost inhuman. He stood barely 3 feet away, struggling with his zipper and staring straight at me. "Occupado!" I snapped. He startled, mumbled something under his breath, and melted back into the darkness. I was officially over it. All of it. And it was time to go. I realized for the first time that I might have made a really grave mistake in coming here, and that I might be in real physical danger. I stepped out into the maze and started moving as quickly as I could without running. Thunder boomed overhead, and I was more bothered by the big guy's absence than I would have been if he was still standing there. Where was he? More shadows darted at the edges of the blue light, and someone's head appeared out of a booth as I made the left back towards the center aisle. The rain pulsed against the tin roof, and the thunder boomed like it struck just outside the block walls. Every hallway looked identical as I fought to keep calm. I kept catching half glimpses of figures standing silently in the dark, watching or making erratic movements, barely visible in the half-light of the screens. I made the final right out of the warren of booths and saw the flickering marquee I noticed when I first came in. To my right were the stairs that I knew led to the blackout curtains and back into the light and relative sanity of the store. As I turned towards them, I saw the big guy standing near the base of the stairs, looking at me wordlessly in the marquee light. I could just make out that he was smiling at me. He wasn't blocking the stairs, but just standing near them. I saw directly in front of me another red exit sign and made for that instead of the stairs. Just as I was about to slam into the crash bar, the faint lights of the exterior neons leaked in just enough for me to see the outline of the heavy padlock on the door. I never felt more trapped in my life. I turned around honestly expecting violence, but before I could even process it, an older man stepped out of the booth right beside me, hands in his pockets, calm, quiet. Can I use this door?" I asked, heart pounding. That's all I could think to say. I was so flustered and fighting the urge to panic. In a low, flat voice, he said, "No, can't use that door. There's an alarm. That would have been bad," he said, and he stretched out the word like bad. The big guy stepped next to him, and I took the opportunity to make for the stairs without another word. I burst back through the blackout curtains, didn't say a single word to the guy at the counter, and went straight out into the pouring rain. Just like in the booth, neons on the outside seemed to be the only illumination, and everything else was blackness. I opened the door to my car and stood for just a split second, considered how the hell I got here and where here even was. It felt like a nightmare built just for me, and nothing else existed outside of this glowing neon shack. Lightning split the sky, and I was inside before the thunder boomed against the glass. I locked the car doors, started the engine, and drove away into the night. Lightning flashed again in the rearview mirror, lighting up the entire dead-end street and those boarded-up houses. I never went back.